everyone to this happening today, to this Biophilic Design workshop. And I have to say I'm really impressed to see so many people here, and it makes me very happy and very excited that you all freed up your very busy agenda to be here today. So this Biophilic Design workshop, or design lab actually, is a new format we have developed as interface over the last few months in order to engage with architects and designers, so with you, about the subject of biophilic design. Why biophilic design? Biophilic design is, as I said, it's design inspired by nature, and as research shows, and I think as every one of you recognize himself, nature has a restorative effect. And we as Interface, we want to create spaces with the human in mind. So spaces, interior spaces, where people feel good, where they feel creative and productive. And biophilic design is the design language we use to create our products. So we will run the workshop today with Oliver Heath. Oliver Heath is known to some of you, I believe. He's a true biophilic design expert. He has his own interior design company in the UK. He's a celebrated TV moderator in channels like BBC and Discovery, and he will lead you through the whole day, through all the workshop.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. I'm delighted to be here. It's fantastic to be here. This is my second time in about a year. And as Suzanne, it sounds like you more or less confused me. I'm basically an architect, interior designer, writer, occasional television presenter, and a biophilic design ambassador for Interface. I've been fascinated in sustainability for about 15 years now, not just how we can create it in buildings and what that means for interior design, but also why people might choose to be sustainable. And I think there's a rising interest in sustainability, both because people are recognising the impact it has on the environment, but also the fact that it can make spaces better and more comfortable to live in. And one of the problems with sustainability at the moment, I feel, is that when we talk about it, very often it's talking about things that people get rather bored of hearing about, things like gas and electricity, and about how you can reduce your use of basic resources. So we need to find ways of exciting them. How can we create a form of sustainability that people go, I want that, I definitely want that. So over the last 15 years I've been talking to people about sustainability, about cutting their use of gas and electricity, and people kind of are interested for a while and then they switch off. But when I talk about health and well-being, when I say, do you want to have a healthier place to live in, where you have less stress, where you're more comfortable, you're more relaxed, that you take less time off work and you're more productive? Well, of course, these are things that everybody wants. Nobody says, oh, I don't want to feel better and healthier. So when we talk about this new human-centered aspect of sustainability and health and well-being, and in particular when we look at biophilic design, it's something that people already know and they already definitely want. So you're onto something very positive here, a form of sustainability that's very popular straight away. Okay. So we all kind of know the sort of answers that are going to happen in this list. So I've sort of divided these into two things. We've got nature and we've got built environment. So I've got a couple of examples in built environment of kind of public spaces, but most of them seem to be homes or grandmother spaces or social spaces. What is clearly missing from these lists of spaces that make us feel good are the spaces that we work in. So nobody's mentioned their workplace. Nobody's mentioned a hospital. You mentioned a courtyard, didn't you? So for me that would be like just outside the workspace. Nobody's mentioned a hospital, nobody's mentioned a school. It's kind of, for me, that suggests that there's an opportunity here. An opportunity for us as designers to create spaces that make it onto this list. That we can find spaces that inspire, make us feel comfortable, calm and relaxed. Because very often, it's the stress in these spaces, the stress in our workplace, the stress in a hospital, the stress in an education environment, that actually stops the true functionality of that space really being delivered. That may not always be our fault. Of course, there's a number of reasons why we can't always deliver the sorts of designs we really want to. But what if we could create spaces that truly inspired better education, better healthcare, and better places to work? And that is really the point of today. How do we create spaces in the built environment that we can use to kind of really truly deliver the intended function? So, the introduction to biophilic design. Now, so why is this important to us today? Well, put very simply, there are a number of reasons. Now, the World Health Organization states that the stress-related conditions of cardiovascular disease from your heart, mental health issues, are likely to be the 2 prime contributing factors to illness by 2020. Added to that, 66% of the developed world will be urbanized by 2050. We're seeing massive rates of urbanization in developing countries. 90% of the UK, where I'm living at the moment, live in urban areas. So as a result, we have a reduced connection to nature. Of course, we're seeing ever greater levels of technology surrounding ourselves. So even, imagine our lives 20 years ago, 15 years ago, we wouldn't have had smartphones, we wouldn't have had tablets. If we had computers, they may have sat on a desk, they may have sat at work, but they wouldn't have surrounded us like they do today. We would have had time to turn the computer off and sit, spend time with our families, spend time just looking out the window, spend time in parks, by the beach, in the forest. Without all that technology, we wouldn't have been dependent. And the problem with all that technology is that it doesn't really allow us the time just to switch off, just to be still for a moment, just to look and to gaze, to regain our mental energy, our physical energy, and importantly, our cognitive ability, our ability to sit and focus on something and to do a good job. Because we're always being distracted. Even when we're at work, we might be working on a piece or a document, but we'll have a Facebook message, a Twitter message, a WhatsApp message, there'll be an SMS coming through. We're constantly being distracted, and this technology means that we can never truly calm down and relax. We spend 90% of our time indoors. Absenteeism in the United States is said to cost $2,000 per employee. So if we as designers could find a design solution that created spaces that reduced that absenteeism even by half, that would be incredible. That would be $1,000 per person. We're adding value to our services. And what's interesting is that when we talk about the spaces that make us feel most comfortable, most relaxed, the spaces that inspire us, spaces that we go to on holiday, we generally talk about going to the beaches, to the mountains, to the forests. So we already know, as do many of your clients, that we can find peace, calm, tranquility, and relaxation in nature. Our jobs as designers is to find ways of incorporating elements of nature into the spaces that we're designing to create calmer, more inspiring, more creative spaces that increases productivity, that increases creativity, that reduces absenteeism. And we have an opportunity as designers to do just that. Now, biophilia means a love of nature, and it's a term that was first popularized by the American psychologist Edward O. Wilson in around the 1980s. Now what he did is he recognized that society was moving from rural areas where they lived into urban areas, and he recognized that there were many problems that came with that. Because of that disconnection with nature, we started to feel more stressed because the rise in technology and urbanization, the pressures that all that created meant that we couldn't really escape, and that all sorts of problems started to come up. And then he recognized that, universally, we all have this deep-rooted connection to nature. Now, over the last 200,000 years, our Homo sapien brains haven't really developed very much. So many of the things that you see here in these cartoons are still important to us today. They're still fundamental to our understanding and appreciation of what makes a good space. That idea that we need shelter, warmth, and security. We need access to food and water. That might be supermarkets, and it might be a view of the sea. We need a connection to fuel and fruit, and we need a sense of community. All of these things are still important to us today, and many of these things are in this list that you've already told us. It's just that in our times of overpopulation and urbanization, we need to find ways to be a little bit more sophisticated with this, and find ways to deliver it in a sustainable way. Recognizing that not only do we need to conserve our precious resources like gas, water, and electricity, but that we also need to create spaces that inspire us, that make us feel good and comfortable and relaxed. And there's an interesting idea called the savannah theory that proposes that through our human evolution, we have a genetic inheritance that allows us to very quickly recognize landscapes that can help us survive and thrive and flourish. So if, as a cave person, you're standing on a big rocky outcrop with a nice, warm, secure cave behind you, you'd feel very comfortable that everything you needed right here in front of you would allow you to survive, thrive and flourish. And you've got everything you need. You've got you've got lots of open space, so you can see potential predators that might come and jump on you. You've got food, you've got potential prey. You've got access to food from trees, fuel in the form of wood, building materials and weapons. You've got access to water and lots of natural light flooding down. And just to demonstrate how important these ideas within us are, you'll recognise many of these ideas in the next slide. The next slide are arguably one of society's most successful spaces, certainly in the UK. This is a space that many people spend a lot of time in. They take their families there, they spend their money. I present to you the pinnacle of British architecture, Westfield Shopping Centre. But of course, you'll immediately recognise many of those savannah theory ideas. Very often when you arrive at a shopping mall, you arrive from a heightened perspective. Somebody mentioned a sense of prospect and a panoramic terrace. When we arrive in a shopping mall, we have that sense of prospect. We can look down, we can orientate ourselves. We can see where the shops are, we can see where the food is. If you look at these trees, they're biomorphic forms that represent nature. We look up at the roof light. It clearly looks like a natural roof light, where natural light's flooding down, you've got artificial clouds. You look down here, looks like ripples forming on water, biomorphic patterns. Everything we need is right here. Everything we need to survive, thrive and flourish is right here in front of us. Finding ways of incorporating elements of nature is fundamental to biophilic design, of course. But of course, many of us find ourselves in urban spaces. We know as designers we'll be given really horrible spaces to design. And people say, look, you're the designer, I'm paying you. I want you to make this dark, windowless office into a Garden of Eden, a wonderful, inspirational space to spend time in, that people are going to be productive and creative in. So, finding ways of incorporating elements of nature is obviously fundamental to biophilic design. And it's at this point that I want to introduce to you the key constructs of biophilic design. So, what are the three key aspects? Now, many of you recognise that what we call nature in the space is fundamental to biophilic design. It's how we improve that contact with real forms of nature. So it's light, it's windows, it's aquariums, it's plants, water, those real things that we can connect with. Secondly, it's natural analogues. Now, where we don't have a real direct connection to nature, we need to find ways of mimicking nature into a space. And we know that as designers, we can create a sense of nature in all sorts of different ways. It might be a digital print, it might be a projection, it might be natural materials, colours and textures. So these are what we call indirect connections or natural analogues. And lastly, and perhaps most importantly because it's so often forgotten, it's what we call the nature of the space, or our human spatial response, how we allow people to connect with nature. And for me as a designer, this is really important because this is where we take all of these ideas in nature in the space, and natural analogues, and we use them. We use our skill, our experience, our opportunities, our budgets, and our creativity to find ways to allow people to interact with nature, to create spaces that are stimulating and energizing, so spaces where people want to work and can sit and focus, but equally spaces where they can sit calmly and meet and talk, places that aren't too loud, and beyond that, find spaces that are calming and recuperative, spaces where they can just restore their mental and physical energy and their cognitive ability so they can get back to work more quickly and be more productive throughout the day. So these three elements, these are the key constructs of biophilic design. Nature in space, natural analogues, how we mimic nature, and the nature of the space. And clearly in this list of what we've written down, it's that human spatial response that we need to look at as designers to go, how do we create a sense of nature, a stronger connection to nature? How do we allow people to interact with nature, whether we have direct or indirect elements in the spaces that we design? So what I want to do now is to go through this bit where I do loads of talking, so you can sit calmly around. Go through what we call the 14 patterns of biophilic design. Now, there are a number of people who have been looking at biophilic design. Stephen Keller, who is one of the early kind of proponents of biophilic design, he's written a number of very good books. That's Kellert, Stephen Keller. He is one of the early sort of written pioneers of biophilic design. And he produced a sort of a list of about 8 patterns of biophilic design. But what we're going to talk about today is what we call the 14 patterns. Now, the 14 patterns was devised by an American company called Terrapin Bright Green, based, I think, in Washington. They've written a number of documents. This is one of them, outlining the 14 patterns. And we're going to go through this because it sort of outlines in the most detail the 14 patterns, and it separates them into these 3 different categories. Now, if you go onto the Terrapin Bright Green website, you can actually download a PDF copy of this document, which allows you to kind of look at it in more detail. It's quite a good website. They've got a number of reports they've written. The economics of biophilic design, they've got some case studies, some of which I'll show you today, and you can also download that. So today, we're going to be looking at Terrapin Bright Green's 14 patterns of biophilic design. So we're going to kick off with number 1. And the first section is really nature in the space. So how we include direct forms of nature in the space. And there are 7 ways that we can do that. The visual connection with nature, non-visual, non-rhythmic sensory stimuli, thermal airflow, presence of water, natural light, and the connection with natural systems. So I'm going to go through each of these in more detail. So the first one is the visual connection with nature. Now, many of us know already, as we've already discussed and written down, that when we connect ourselves with nature, it has the ability to calm us down, to de-stress us, to relax us. In fact, looking onto nature can reduce blood pressure and heart rates, and as a result can allow us to be more productive and more connected to the people around us. So, very simply, just organising desks and allowing people to look out onto views is a great way to improve the visual connection to nature. So, just think about how you organise people in the spaces that you're designing. It might be that you put windows nearer desks, you create some shading, you allow views out. It might be that you include elements of nature in the space. So it might be about including plants, it might be about all sorts of things, views out onto nature, and plants and flowers, and lots of things that we've already talked about today. The visual connection to nature is important because, obviously being bifocal human beings, the way we interpret and understand space is through our eyes. So this is really one of the most powerful ways that we can improve that human connection to nature. So the next is the non-visual connection to nature. Now, if you imagine, at its most extreme, that if you were to go and work in a white cube, and the floor was white, the desk was white, and the walls and the ceiling were white, but it was bright, it would kind of be exciting and stimulating for a while, but very soon you'd have a sense of sensory deprivation. That idea that you would just crave some texture under your feet, on your hands, the sound of the space, like you mentioned earlier, that sense of complete quiet can send you a little bit crazy. So recognising that as human beings we've got a number of other very powerful senses that can help us to understand spaces, but also to add a sense of nature. So think about the non-visual ways that we can connect with nature, through our sense of touch, through our hearing, through the materials under our feet, through the way a space smells. All of these are opportunities that we have as a designer to create a greater sense of calm and relaxation and improved connection to nature. And there are lots and lots of ways that we can do it. Of course, we can introduce acoustic systems. We can add acoustic materials that deadens live noises. We can add perfumes and fragrance. We can add plants and flowers. And we can have materials that have a distinct sense of natural touch, be it in leather, be it in felt, be it in natural timber surfaces. Third, the non-rhythmic sensual stimuli. One of the issues with Terrapin Bright Green's approach is they write quite difficult words to understand, so I'll explain it to you. These are things that we basically know. Non-rhythmic sensual stimuli is that sense of calm and relaxation that we get when we look at the wind blowing through leaves on a tree, or the ripples moving across a pool of water. And when we have the opportunity to sit and relax and look out over natural materials, plants, trees and water, we get this wonderful sense of calm and relaxation. There's an idea called attention deficit disorder. Basically, it proposes that we have two forms of concentration. One form is direct concentration. So you know that thing when you're sitting at your computer and you're really focused, and you know that you can sit and focus for a period of time, but after a while your attention starts to drift, your cognitive performance starts to reduce. After a couple of hours you just can't sit and focus any longer. So as well as that direct and focused form of concentration, we also need more relaxed forms of concentration, and looking onto nature allows for this sort of indirect forms of concentration, which is very calming and very restorative. So when we look at these ripples, the wind moving through the trees, it just has the ability to calm and relax us very, very quickly. And there are lots of ways that we can do this in spaces. We can have kinetic facades and materials, we can introduce plants with air moving through, and many of us would have been to doctors' surgeries or hospitals or dentists' waiting rooms where we have a fish tank. And that's that very sort of gentle, calm sense of movement of the fish gently moving around, the ripples in the water, the swaying of the plants in the water, all goes to create a greater sense of calm and relaxation before we go and see the doctor or the dentist. Fourth is thermal airflow and variability. Now, if you think about the experience of how we feel air when we're in nature, so imagine going for a drive into the countryside and going for a walk. You park your car, you get out of the car, you feel the wind blowing across your skin, you might walk into some woods and you get that sense of humidity, you get some of the smells, you go walk through the woods towards a stream, you get the sense of moisture in the air, and you walk up a mountain, you get that breeze. So thermal airflow and variability is much more than just getting good, clean air. It's also about thinking about temperature, humidity, CO2 levels, and how we can recreate that in spaces. One of the problems we see in the likes of American offices where they're obsessed with cubicles is that air tends to move along the top of cubicles, so people sitting in them don't have that airflow moving across the spaces. So thinking about how people can interact with thermal airflow variability. So very simply, it might be about introducing plants, it might be about allowing people to open windows, allowing dynamic forms of ventilation in spaces. Presence of water. And we know that when we're surrounded by water, and many of the things that we've mentioned here, being near the beach, being near water, being near rivers or waterfalls, water features, makes us feel calm and relaxed. Listening to and being in the presence of water is very calming and relaxing. As I mentioned, that idea of introducing water features can be problematic sometimes because of maintenance, because of cost, but there are ways of adding elements of water through artificial systems. But if not, it could be about having views out onto water, or simply having a screen with elements of water on a video screen. 6, it's about dynamic and diffused light. And we all know that natural light is fundamental to our appreciation of spaces. Now, when I as a designer talk to people who don't really know what they want for a space, the most likely thing that they're going to say is, I want a sense of the space to be light and airy. Is that the same? Do people say similar things in Romania? Light and air is the first thing that people say. They recognise that natural light is fundamental to create spaces that make us feel good. But natural light, beyond that, also connects us to the time of day. And there are subtle shifts in colour temperature of light that we see in the morning. It might be yellow, orange going to yellow. In the middle of the day, the light becomes more energising and blue. In the evening, it goes from yellow to orange to kind of purples and blues. So having those sort of subtle shifts in colour temperature allows our experience of light to affect our circadian rhythms, which are our body's connections to periods of light and dark across a 24-hour period. Our circadian rhythms govern our mood, our behaviour and our hormone release. So if we have a connection to natural light, our hormone release allows us to have a good exposure of melatonin and serotonin, which are the sleep-wake hormones. So when we have those good balances of melatonin and serotonin, we can sleep well, but equally we'll be alert more easily, which allows us to be more focused and have better concentration. So there are lots of ways that we can improve natural light. So whether it's about having nice big windows, reducing window coverings, putting desks nearer to windows, having roof lights, having materials that bounce natural light, having glass panels in offices to allow light to filter from one space to another. We know that as designers, there's all sorts of ways to introduce natural light, to bounce it, to borrow it, to filter it. Natural light is fundamental to our health and well-being and our appreciation of what constitutes good spaces. Number 7 is a connection to natural systems. Now, in England, we have lots and lots of weather every day. We've got lots of rain, we've got wind, we might have a bit of sunshine, maybe some hail, some sleet, occasionally snow. So connection to natural systems may be about daily weather-changing patterns, but it may also be about those slower, more seasonal connections. So how do we allow people that sense of season? And when we do that, it allows us to be connected to the geography of the location of the spaces that we're in. It helps to govern people's sort of annual experience throughout the year. There are lots and lots of ways that we can do it. Obviously having views out onto nature, deciduous trees where the leaves change and fall, change colour, fruit that can grow, leaves and patterns and different sort of materials that change throughout the year. Number 8, now we move on to natural landmarks. So as I mentioned, where we don't have the opportunity to connect with real forms of nature, we need to find materials, textures, colours and patterns that can enhance that sense of nature being mimicked in a space. Now what the research shows us is that where we don't have a direct connection to nature, this indirect direct connection to nature can still have some mental and physical recuperative benefit. So what's important is that we find ways of introducing a sense of nature. Now there are 3 ways that we can do that. The first is in biomorphic forms and patterns. The second is in material connections, colours and patterns. And the third is in what we call complexity and order. And I'm going to go through each of these. So the first is biomorphic forms and patterns. So biomorphic forms, you remember that image of Westfield Shopping Centre, and we saw that big column that looked like a tree. That's a biomorphic form. Now biomorphic forms have been happening for a long time, and you'll recognise many of them in the Art Nouveau buildings that surround us in the city here. Works of Hector Guimard, Victor Horta, Antoni Gaudi, all those kind of Art Nouveau architects were introducing biomorphic forms in different ways. Now it happens best when we introduce it in both a structural sense, i.e. in columns or in balustrades, but equally when we introduce it in colours and patterns and textures all around us. So biomorphic forms and patterns, it might be organic shapes, might be natural colours, spirals, fractals, curves and shapes. We'll see some right here. That sense of softness, that sense of roundedness that connects us to nature. Material connection to nature. This is when we use materials that may not necessarily have had a high degree of processing, so like the material connection to nature that we get through the plywood on these tables or on the floor, but it's also how we mimic elements of nature. So interfaces, biomimetic carpet tiles are a great way of introducing an element of nature into the spaces. So when we talk about a material connection to nature, it might be stone, it might be kind of natural timber surfaces. There's all sorts of materials that we can introduce. And when we do that, when we introduce that, we can create spaces that feel rich and human. We have a sense of grain and texture into the spaces, which can be stimulating sensory. Number 10 is complexity and order. Recognising that when we're surrounded in nature, there is a natural hierarchy of pattern and texture. And I quite like this space here in this image because it represents that sense of complexity and order. And this is really about adding a level of interest. And as I mentioned, with those kind of pure white pristine spaces where we get a sense of sensory deprivation, when we think about complexity and order and pattern, it adds a sort of visually stimulating, enriching quality to a space. And when you look at this space, you see that we've got textured patterns on the floors, we've got natural wooden tables, so you have that sense of grain and colour and pattern. We've got these vertical window mullions, and then we see those planted window boxes up there that in some ways reflect a kind of natural tree-like canopy.